Hunter, there's a new monster!
Wait, really?
No! But I got you, right?
Not really.
Yeah, I got him. Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, with Title Update 1 coming to Monster Hunter Wilds, I finally got one of my greatest wishes. One of the biggest requests from the player base as a whole, which is an actual high-rank version of the final boss of Monster Hunter Wilds. Hell, even just the ability to fight it again past the first story quest, high rank or not. And with this, I have spent quite a bit of time hunting Zoh Shia over the last few days, and it's gotten me thinking once again about past final bosses. And now that I've had more of a proper bit of experience with Zoh Shia, I want to look back and rank him against all of the other end bosses of Monster Hunter, the final bosses throughout the years, and not just him, because by technicality there are usually 3 or 4 final bosses per Monster Hunter game, mostly just because of how they are organized. For early games we're talking about one final boss for village, one final boss for hub quest, then you'd often get another final boss for high rank village in the expansion, and another one for the online final boss as well in the expansion too. Then sometimes there'd be other context as well, so I'll explain what each monster's position is when we hit their section if it's a less obvious one, and I'll be comparing them based on the gravitas of their fight and my feelings about them as a monster, and especially because this is a ranking of final bosses, there will be an extra sort of hidden points awarded for pure spectacle, which is why something like Tigrex, which is technically on this list, is a monster that I do genuinely quite like, but I don't think he's great in the specific context of being a final boss. That said, let's go in game order from the very beginning with Monoblos, the village final boss of Monster Hunter 1, who I've got in the B tier. As a monster, Monoblos is very cool. I still hope that we get him returning before the next time that we see Diablos, as they are incredibly similar monsters, and Diablos has gotten way more of a spotlight over returning games, but I miss Monoblos. He feels like a perfect mix of derpy and threatening, and I say that mostly just because of his silly little beak mouth, but as far as comparing him as a final boss, he definitely lacks a bit of the weight that a lot of the monsters have on this list. Then next up is Fatalis, the online final boss of the first game, who I've gotten the S+ tier, and I will be judging his most recent fight entry in the series. Generally, I'm counting each monster at whatever form they were considered a final boss, and while Fatalis was originally the final boss of Monster Hunter and Monster Hunter G, the expansion, he also takes on a final boss role in Iceborne at the end of the title updates, which is a whole new kind of final boss that we've had for the new generation games. That said, as a creature itself, Fatalis is imposing as hell. Incredibly cool looking, fantastically designed to just be essentially a hyper-optimized dragon. He looks simple because he is, but he's a fire-breathing dragon, but then he takes that to just such a specific degree of badassery through the fight that it makes it stand out even in the Monster Hunter universe because of how simple a concept he is at a glance, but how unbelievably top tier his execution is on top of that, at least for the newer updated version of him in Iceborne, of course. Following that, Monster Hunter G's village final boss is Lao Shen Lung, who I've gotten the D tier way down there. This guy is definitely a casualty of his position more than anything else, his actual release timing, but he's essentially just a big long lizard. His fight, even when recreated in Monster Hunter Generations, was mostly just beating on him while he ignores you, because all he really wants to do is walk from point A to point B, and you're just like a fly buzzing around in his face. There is something neat about that as a concept, for sure, and they sort of did that with things like Call of Taroth and Monster Hunter World, where at the very start she doesn't much care about you until you show her that you're a threat. But Lao does it for the entire quest, essentially. And yes, it is mostly just because he was added so early on. He was such an early creature, and the first one of his size. He was the first time that they took on the concept of a siege fight. Maybe one day they will update his fight, and I'll appreciate him more as a result, but currently I just view him as like an old man monster who's gotten a little bit lost. He doesn't have much personality past that, or much of a fight as far as I'm concerned. Next up is village final boss of Monster Hunter Dos, which was Lunastra, who I have in the B tier. Lunastra is a very cool monster in the modern Monster Hunter games, in my opinions, but when she was originally added, when she was a final boss, and so her position on this list, she was essentially just blue Teostra for all intents and purposes, which is just really anticlimactic for something that is considered a final boss. Moving on to the online final boss of Monster Hunter Dos, that would be Crimson Fatalis, who I also have in the B tier. This I think shows a lot of my thoughts on the differences for base Fatalis after his upgraded fight in Iceborne, because Crimson Fatalis is very similar to regular Fatalis, visually, conceptually, lore-wise, and all that, but the fight is relatively outdated at this point, with his original final boss version fight being essentially just regular Fatalis, but with some meteors is added on top. It was definitely more of a spectacle than anything else on this tier, but being a slight variation of the previous game's final boss and the weaker fight in my opinion, that's why I've got him in this tier. Then for the village final boss of Monster Hunter Freedom 2, we have Tigrex in the B tier as well. Great monster, only a final boss because of the weird splits in second gen games really, and if this was a tier list just rating them as monsters alone, he would be higher. But with the context of final bosses, he just falls behind in proper impact and spectacle for that role. For the online final boss of Monster Hunter Freedom 2, and also the village final boss in Monster Hunter Freedom Unite in contrast, we have a Cantor in the A tier. A Cantor is really cool as a creature. He's a monster who just lives for the glory of combat, roaming around and fighting wherever he can, eating whatever he wants, and generally just being a bastard of a lizard. His cutscenes in his fight give him a properly imposing sort of feeling, and the fact that he isn't an elder dragon but is often referred to as a god by nickname if nothing else, makes him have a certain weight to him. And I'm not talking about how big he is, but yes, also that. Moving on to the online final boss for Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, we have Eucanlos in the S tier, the companion monster for a Cantor. Where a Cantor is all about searching for glorious combat, Eucanlos is sort of the opposite. He's all about solitude. He's happy to just be left alone in his icy zone and just live his life there quietly. He's got a silly shovel chin, and I find him aesthetically much more pleasing and interesting than a Cantor personally, and I love his ability to just like dig through the ice as if it were liquid. It feels very shark-like, but it also makes him sort of scary too, like a gigantic predecessor to Zamtrios, essentially. And I think he's an awesome final boss. Then heading to the third generation games, we have the village final boss of Tri, which is Sadeas, up in the S tier as well. Sadeas is an absolutely top tier creature design, concept, the music is unforgettable, the way it is brought into the story is great, and while underwater combat definitely had its ups and downs, I think Sadeas probably struggled the most because of it. As a spectacle, him being an absolutely massive underwater creature is such an unbelievably unique and forgettable experience. But I would be lying if I didn't mention that I think it adds a lot of awkwardness to try and keep pace with something that large in underwater combat, to try and stick to its weaker spots and then hit them with actual fighting. Top tier spectacle, top tier design, okay as a fight in itself. As for the online final boss in Monster Hunter Tri, that would be Elatrion, who I have in the S tier. Again, I'm not judging his Iceborne fight as he wasn't a final boss in that game, but even in the third generation, he was quite a unique gem of a creature, being the first black dragon that, in my opinion, actually felt like a potentially continent-destroying calamity. His design is fantastic, he has serious devilish or demonic vibes, and I still love the idea of a monster that can control all 5 of the elements, but the fact that doing so also makes him completely unstable is such a good bit of personality to give to a final boss. I'm a big fan of him in general, but I think that there are some that rank higher for me personally. Moving on to Monster Hunter Portable 3rd, the village final boss for this game was Zinogre because there was no underwater combat in this game, and I have him in the B tier. This is quite similar to Tigrex's entry for me. I'm a big fan of Zinogre as a monster. I enjoy his design, I enjoy his fight, his ecology in general is quite cool, but he is heavily lacking in spectacle and the grandeur required to compare to the final boss monsters on the rest of this list. Following that, the Portable 3rd online boss is Amatsu, who I have in the S+ tier, and who you could argue was the final boss of Sunbreak, being the main monster in the final major title update, so I will count his updated fight just because of that technicality. I still think with his old fight though, he would be at minimum in S tier, but there is so much more extra cinematicness and spectacle in the Sunbreak version, it just oozes final boss energy out the ass. The visuals of the creature are gorgeous, the concept is great, a full storm controlling dragon that flies through its control of the weather rather than actually having wings, and then just the ridiculous set of attacks it had in Sunbreak were the cherry on top of it all, really. Then for the final village boss of Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, we've got Ivory Legiacris in the B tier, and you'll be pretty used to hearing this, but a lot of the village final bosses don't feel like final boss monsters to me. They're great creatures, designs, fights, but it just isn't a final boss in my mind, in my heart. And so while it gets full points as a monster, and while it is technically a final boss, it gets shoved down a few steps on my list because of that. After that, we have the online final boss of 3 Ultimate, which was Dire Morales in the A tier. Conceptually, freaking incredible monster. Just a walking volcano who radiates so much heat from living that he can basically boil the sea as he's walking through it, which will then kill all the fish that live there as a result. He's a fantastic example example of a monster that may not be inherently aggressive, but is a danger to every living thing within a massive radius around it just from its pure existence. When you're talking about final boss energy, this guy has loads of it, and I love his concept and his design in general, but the fight is undeniably severely lacking. Like Lao Shen Lung, I very much hope he gets to come back redone someday in the future, but as an original state, I think his fight just anchors him down quite hard from being in any higher tier than this. Then next up, heading into the 4th generation, the final boss of the village story in Monster Hunter 4 is Shagaru Magala in the S tier. This is one of the best village final boss entries in a lot of ways. As a monster, Shagaru is quite cool, not one of my personal favorites, but one that I have a lot of general respect for and can appreciate from an outside view. But his position here is mostly just for how important a monster he is to Monster Hunter 4. You simply could not have another monster in this position. No other monster could feel correct as the final boss here. No other monster could be the end of this village storyline and have it feel correct. It all leads up to him, it all adds up to Shagaru, and it finishes with him there. And while he may not be quite on the spectacle level of some final bosses, he is definitely a flashy monster without a doubt. As for the online boss of Monster Hunter 4, that would be Dalamadur, who I have in the S+ tier, and while I think the fight could definitely be improved, and I hope that they do bring him back in the future in a much more free and open area where you can fight him a bit more like proper monsters rather than just feeling like you're fighting a wall that moves occasionally. But his actual design, his concept, the way he looks, the way he feels, sounds, the way he moves, everything about him is perfect for a final boss, and he's a monster that I have always held either in or just a little bit out of my top 10 monsters, despite the fact that I hadn't even fought him myself until like last year, and even then I consider the fight to be the weakest part of him as a monster, but the rest just carries it so hard. Following that in for Ultimate, the village final boss is sort of two monsters. 2 slots are generally accepted, which are Apex Seregios, who I have in the B tier. Cool idea, and Seregios himself is great, but this falls into the sort of Tigrex, Zinogre, and Ivory Legiacris category for me, where he just doesn't have quite enough gravitas or spectacle, even though this one is Apex Seregios specifically. The other commonly accepted choice for final boss of this game's village story is Rusted Kushala Deora, who I also have in the B tier. Rusted Kushala is a great example of an interesting monster concept with an underwhelming fight attached to it, and also just absolutely lacking the spectacle compared to a lot of final bosses. After that, the online final boss of 4 Ultimate is Gogmazios up in the S+ tier. Incredible GOG tier monster, fantastic design, tar-covered gigantic dragon, looks absolutely nightmarish, has siege weaponry like a full-on Dragonator embedded in its body, and it's still functioning like it's nothing to have that there, and then just a full suite of terrifying and imposing attacks. This is a great example of a fantastic design compared with a fun and solid fight, and an incredible amount of spectacle added on too. Hell, the fact that his sheer size alone makes my heart just stop whenever he starts to fly. That is all that I feel needs saying about him. Then moving on to Monster Hunter Generations, the village final boss, that would be Glavenus in the A tier. Great monster, great fight. I think just based on his own design, he has slightly more spectacle than a lot of the monsters I put in the B tier instead, for not feeling very final bosses, but he still has less final boss energy than all the monsters in the tiers above. Then for the online final boss of Generations is Nakarkos, who I have in the S tier. I love the sort of bait and switch they do with this monster. For those who don't know, your first Nakarkos that you find only fights with the tentacles above the ground, so it feels almost like a two-headed monster. Then the full fight reveals the rest of the monster, the mouth, he'll actually start showing his face with his crazy colorful beam, everything like that too, and he has a unique status application, he has a super unique fight, he has a unique zone that you fight him in, he's got cool visuals, he has an impactful moveset, and he's just a super solid monster in general. The only real reason I have him in the S tier instead of the S+ is because I need to leave him some room to grow if he ever returns and gets improved. As well, I don't dislike his fight by any means, I think it definitely has a lot of space for improvement if they bring him back. Moving on to Generations Ultimate, Ahtal Ka, who I have as an S+ tier. Absolutely incredible monster, fantastic design, fantastic fight, unbelievable amounts of spectacle, and a super varied moveset to show it all off. This is like the gold standard of final bosses, pun intended, and and I really hope this monster gets to return someday so that we can see it shown again. Even if they don't change anything, I'd love to fight Ahtal again the exact same way it personally exists in a more modern Monster Hunter combat style. Next up is Valstrax, also in the S+ tier. A very different sort of aesthetic style than Ahtal, but again, a great designed monster and fight in general. Maybe a bit less spectacle than Ahtal has, but the around the world super attack where he flies up and then just lands on you like a meteor himself absolutely does the job of striking both fear and awe into hunters in equal measures. Then with that, we move on to the 5th generation games. Monster Hunter World doesn't have a village and hub split, so the final boss is Xeno'jiiva, who I have in the A tier. Visually, just an absolutely top tier monster. The spectacle is quite high with this one, but the actual moment to moment feel of the fight is quite meh to me, and I've said this before in the past too. I think Xeno'jiiva is an incredible first experience, but mostly because of how unusual it is aesthetically and how cool it is to see it do stuff like hurting itself with its own attacks to represent how fresh out of the egg that it is. But as far as Monster Hunter combat specifically, I think there are better examples of it feeling good in this list in the higher tiers. This is more just a good focus on the personality of the monster. Following that, we have the Iceborne final boss, which is Shara Ishvalda up in the S+ tier. This guy is awesome. I love the fact that he shifts from rock mode to demon mode basically as you fight him. His mastery of vibration and airwaves as a method of attack is so unique. His level of spectacle is incredible across his moveset, and speaking of his moveset, I genuinely enjoy fighting him. I think he has fun attacks and a great flow to the fight as well, just a near perfect example of a final boss in Monster Hunter. Then we have Monster Hunter Rise, which did bring back village and hub splits once again, and the village final boss is Magdamalo, who I've gotten the A tier. I think he is very similar to Glavenus' spot, where he's a cool design, a bit of mysterious nature to him too, a fun fight, some unique effects, and he even does have a unique status which does help him sort of carve out a more unique space, but he also just has a bit more flashiness and eye-catching moves than something like a Tigrex, for example, which is why I have him up in the A tier, because he's a bit more fitting with the final boss archetype in my eyes as a result of that. Then for the online final boss of Rise, that would be Allmother Narwa in the S tier. Despite being released in a title update, it's pretty much confirmed that this was always considered the final story boss of Rise by the devs. An absolutely terrifying evolution of Thunder Serpent Narwa after she basically sucks in the essence of Ibushi and becomes this just absolute god of thunder. It's a cool fight with pretty solid design, lots of spectacleness to it, but I just personally like it a little bit less than anything that I put in the S+ tier. This one is entirely just my own opinion. That said, next up we have Sunbreak, and the final boss of the story itself for Sunbreak is Geismagorn, who I have in the S tier as well. Great as far as the actual combat, the story around him is also quite cool. The flashiness of his moveset is extremely high, especially with some of the moments that happen that are just really memorable in the fight. The way that it starts, the way that he'll try and climb up the wall and you gotta shoot him down, it's just his actual visual design that throws me off with him. I know he is supposed to give vibes of like a demon from the depths more than anything else, but to me, Monster Hunter monsters are always rooted in some level of actual real-world biology behind them, and that's a big part of why I love them. But when I look at Geismagorn, my brain just cannot parse it as an actual animal. It's just like a demonic entity in my head, and while that's maybe what they were trying to go for, I just think I like other monsters more, and it's simple as that. Then there's one more technical final boss level creature to mention for Sunbreak, which is the final monster that was added in a bonus update, Primordial Malzeno, who I have in the S+ tier. He may not quite have the same level of flashiness or spectacle level as Sunbreak's Amatsu, for example, or even Geismagorn, but he has quite the spectacle of a fight for a monster that doesn't even get a unique arena or a map type area or anything like that, and just fights on a standard map. The phase swapping as he goes is really cool, the concept of the monster itself is awesome, and he has one of the genuinely best feeling fights in the entirety of Sunbreak, if not in the Monster Hunter series as a whole, at least in my own opinion. So while he may have a touch less final boss energy than the other S+ tier ranked monsters, I think he deserves this spot for pure monster quality and just having enough final boss energy to make it count anyways. Finally then, we have Monster Hunter Wilds, and while there is no village or hub split in this game, it does very clearly feel like low rank and high rank have that sort of concept and feel baked into them. So I'll be doing 2 final bosses for Wilds so far. The first, the low-rank final boss, is Zoh Shia, who I have in the S+ tier. The artificial construct black dragon, a monster built to embody at the very least Fatalis, if not all of the other greatest threats that we've seen in the series as well. And Oh, this thing is such a big moment for the series, and especially for the lore nerds. Visually, he's an incredible monster. The concept of the wyvern milk crystallizing to form a regenerative shell around him and keep him alive through battle after battle, the hunter having to smash that shell open to get to the actual abomination that is inside of it, the way the moveset slowly unlocks as you do this, the way it interacts so heavily with Wilk as one of the major mechanics of the game and the story and all of that culminating in this fight, and the fight being so active and interesting too. It's just an absolutely top tier final boss as far as I'm concerned, and I don't think that's recency bias either on this one. I think Zoh Shia will stay on this tier for me forever. Just a super impactful monster overall that is also a final boss. Then finally we have the final boss of the high rank story, which I suppose would be regular Arkveld, who is the last HR unlock of the base game, and I have him in S+ tier. His design is so big and bulky, but also mysterious. He looks like a creature that was frozen for thousands of years and then thawed out in a modern age full of sleek, optimized creatures surrounding him, and he's just him. He's big, he's weirdly shaped, he's got these chains coming off of his arm that are weird, his movements probably take so much more effort than they have any reason to, and he makes up for this by sucking the energy from other monsters through endless consumption. And the fact that his actual place in wilds is that he is the sole existing member of a previously extinct species brought back through essentially immaculate conception from an artificial creature which doesn't even have reproductive organs. It's just given such a heavy weight in the story itself that even if the fight has a little bit less final boss energy, the context makes up for it completely. And even then, the fight itself has plenty of big, impactful, flashy attacks too. And while maybe it should be like S tier as a final boss, I really like Arkveld on a personal level. So fuck it, S+, it's my list, why not? That just about does it for today then, everyone. My up-to-date ranking on all of the final boss or end boss monsters that we've had through the years in the Monster Hunter series. The ones that have been placed at the very end of their respective game or section of the game at the very least. I hope you've all enjoyed this then, and of course feel free to let me know your own thoughts on all of these monsters down in the comments below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.